there, everyone. Welcome to episode number 694 of this here electronic engineering podcast called Amelia's Weekly Fish Fry. Brought to you by eejournal.com and written, produced, and hosted by me, Amelia Dalton. Today, we're talking about a problem that is increasingly difficult to ignore: wildfires and extreme weather. Wildfires are growing more intense and more costly, and understanding exactly how a fire will behave can mean the difference between getting people and resources out of harm's way in time, or not. My guest today is Ratnathicam, Chief Growth Officer from Technosylva, a company whose tagline says it all: we fight fire and extreme weather with science. Technosylva combines massive amounts of high-resolution environmental data, artificial intelligence, sophisticated fire behavior modeling, and some serious computing power to predict where wildfires are likely to spread and how they will behave. So today we're digging into the technology behind those predictions. Indy and I talk about Technosylva's dedicated wildfire supercomputing system, how AI fits into the architecture, what kinds of high-resolution data are required to model fire behavior, and why hyperlocal modeling is so important when a wildfire is involved. All right, without further ado, please welcome Indy to Fish Fry. Hi, Indy. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for letting me be here. This is great.
Absolutely. Okay, so Technosylva's tagline is "We fight fire and extreme weather with science." So tell me about your mission.
Well, I get the pleasure of representing nearly 300 people who show up every day to try and make the world more resilient in the face of wildfires and other extreme weather. So this is a mission of heart for our entire team. We're made up mostly of scientists. So in 300-person organization, I think we're like less than 2% or 1%, sales and marketing folks. All the rest are PhD scientists and meteorologists, data science, former firefighters, you name it. If it's a relevant science, we've probably got it here. So that's really the mission of the company. And we're trying to put decision quality, validated science, scientifically based information, and to take it out of the lab and put it, in the hands of operational folks who can do the most with it. So folks like fire agencies, utility operations folks, emergency managers, long-term planners. Those are the folks who are forced to make critical fire and extreme weather safety decisions. They've got to make long-term plans about how to best mitigate against these disasters, how to protect communities and structures and people. And so we're trying to give them better and better intelligence to enable them to do that, more effectively. Like they put everything into it, and the least we can do is to use our science to try and help them.
All right, so Technosylva uses AI and the largest dedicated wildfire supercomputing system in the world. So, can you walk us through the architecture of this system and how AI algorithms are trained to predict fire behavior?
Yeah, so to do that, this just kind of starts at the beginning for us. We've been at this for nearly 30 years now. I know AI is pretty new, but we're not. We've been around the science, as you mentioned at the beginning. That's where we started. And so it really comes with the starting point for us is a fundamental understanding and long-term data sets and so forth around the weather, the fuels, the topography that drive fire behavior under a variety of different conditions. Right. And so we started with the scientific modeling, that at that time, 30 years ago, there wasn't even really machine learning yet. And then it certainly wasn't AI. And so, the starting point there was understanding individual fire behavior and simulation and modeling. You fast forward to where we are now, and we're doing 9 billion simulations a day, actually, across the entire United States at 2 kilometer resolution. Our models are not sort of just purely AI. They're a combination of science plus AI, and it's really the science at the start, and AI makes it faster, extends our prediction windows, and improves our fidelity effectively. But the reality is we're validating this data and this information and these simulations against operational reality constantly, right? This isn't a sort of an AI output or sort of spitting it out of the engine. The thing we always say is that, like, look, if you've got to make a life safety decision, or if you've got to make a decision to potentially turn off power to prevent a fire in an area that's a thing of last resort, you don't ever want to have to say it's because the AI told me so, right? You need to be able to sort of have accountability for that. You need to be able to have rationale and explainability behind the AI effectively, or behind the modeling even, or wherever it came from. You need to explain why, right? So that's a critically important piece of the puzzle there. So to your question about sort of architecture and modeling and so forth, we're trained on a massive historical database of fire events. So the conditions that were present, what the fuels look like, and how the fire actually behaved in those circumstances. So our models are actually taking apart the different parts of fire behavior, validating each of the context and the circumstances, and then using that modeling to sort of develop a predictive view of what's happening next. So that's producing things that are both long term, so things that are, I'm making an investment of billions of dollars to try and prevent fires, or to an asset that I want to protect against fires, or to make sure it doesn't cause them. I might be making billions of dollars of investment as a utility or a government agency or something like that, and I want to make sure that my risk that I get back for that is worth it, right? Like how much risk am I buying back effectively? And down to the operational time period, right? Which is I'm actually 5 days out. Utilities across the country right now are using our data to determine when is an event coming? Where is exactly is it going to happen? Which assets are probably most likely to be at risk, or worse yet, a source for something like this, based on the actual conditions of those assets, and more importantly, the environment that they're in. So that's kind of a sense of what's happening there. With those kinds of outcomes there, we're validating against real world events all the time. When agencies and actual fires break out, we're not only doing the simulations, but our scientists are looking at, what's happening in those fires and making sure that behavior is right. And so we're using that to constantly update, not just at an AI level, but at a physical, real world understanding level of like what's happening there, so we can characterize things properly in the future.
So, the challenge of wildfire modeling is capturing how fire spreads beyond surface level data. So,
Yeah.
what high resolution data inputs and models allow your systems to predict fire spread in ways traditional surface wind readings may not capture?
Yeah, I mean, your premise is right on point, right? Which is that wind happens at the surface, it happens 100 meters up, it happens 1,000 meters up, right? Like that,
Mhm.
at all these different intervals. And, likewise, topography changes. Wind is not characterized, reasonably. Most global models are around 31 kilometer resolution, right? So that's not enough, right? Like, so a downslope wind coming off of, the Front Range in Colorado or whatever, it has its own behavior associated with it that varies, almost meter to meter, never mind, 31 kilometers apart. And so you need that kind of fidelity effectively, a finer grain of fidelity in order to get there. So the overall fire behavior, think of it as a three-dimensional space, right? And not a two-dimensional space. And so you need to sort of understand all the characteristics of all three dimensions of that space in order to get there, including both the weather conditions, the fuel conditions, and topography has a real strong influence in there as well. So what we're adding in here ourselves and through our science, so high resolution numerical weather modeling, we're doing that at a neighborhood scale, into that 2 kilometer, and tighter resolution. In some cases, we'll downscale that base resolution to something tighter if we need to. We capture localized wind patterns, humidity gradients, temperature variations, and things that, global forecasts will largely miss. We take into account things like dynamic fuel moisture. So fuels, aren't static. Live fuel moisture content shifts. Some cases in the course of a day, it can actually shift based on conditions with dew and with other events that are happening. The relative humidity and so forth can be in there. And it's a strong predictor of fire intensity and spread. We're mapping fuels at a granular level. We recently released a urban conflagration model We instinctively all know that when a fire comes close to a city, bad, right? Like we don't need models always to tell us, that. And I think people take the appropriate action there, at least certainly on, our emergency managers and planners and agencies, certainly take that action. Utilities as well. However, what we're seeing more is that, when it actually hits, when fire, hits a community, it actually takes on its own burning characteristics, right? So you have more dead spaces in between. We have structures that burn quite differently than trees and grasses. And so we've started to do fuel mapping effectively in the urban environment, not just in the wildland environment. And so we have different, types of fuels that are used in our modeling in that. 12 different distinct WUI fuel types actually that we characterized in there. We take things like high resolution topography and fuse that with our weather so that way we can capture the impacts of, terrain on weather. Wind whistles through a canyon a lot differently than it flies, through the plane effectively, right? So all of those things are considerations here. And I guess the really kind of cool part about this whole thing, if we, nerd out a little bit on the technology, is once upon a time you take a snapshot, right? In other words, you do all your calculations and you'd come up with a map that was, red, yellow, and green for, risk or something like that. And that, unfortunately, that map was outdated about the time it was done. Backwards looking, not forwards looking. It was a reasonable snapshot in time. We're doing this hourly now for the entirely US. So it's a continuous look at, fire behavior effectively, over time.
So, why does the ability to accurately predict fire risk require hyper local data modeling to the point where the same red flag warning can mean very different things just a couple miles apart?
Yeah, so the red flag warning, look, thank goodness for those, right? Like that, that we have a government agency that will, give us the warning and, that sort of connects to the National Weather Service. And I don't know about you, but on my phone, I see that we have a red flag warning and I know to keep a lookout and to, watch myself for any kind of ignition effectively is bad. Where red flag warnings are typically at their most granular level at the county level. And even, where I live in Massachusetts, counties cover a lot of ground, right? And the conditions at one end of the county, are quite different than the middle, which is quite different than the other end.
Hmm.
And so the challenge with that, so I think it's great for public safety warning. It's great for all of us to have that alert level. The challenge of it is if I'm making an operational decision. So, for example, if I'm in a high risk environment where I'm having, 99th percentile fire weather or something like that, I probably know enough that there's going to be possible risk for ignition, and I'll probably know further from our data that there's going to be, risk for that ignition to be consequential, a big fire. Now, what I really want to know is where can I, if I'm a fire agency, where can I pre-position some of my resources,
Hmm.
right? Which end of the county should I be putting them on, right,
Hmm.
in order for them to be able to respond most quickly to a likely threat? If I'm a utility company and look, nobody wants to turn off the power ever,
Right.
right? But if I have to do it, and those conditions are terrible, and my choices are here that I risk, potentially one of my assets failing under high winds or some other unstoppable circumstances, I certainly don't want a fire to be on top of that. So I don't want to turn off my entire territory, the entirety of a county, or even, the entirety of a red flag area. That could be, hundreds of thousands of customers. I want to be able to be as precise as I can about which circuits are in the highest risk zones, what are the consequences associated with those, and I want to watch the conditions very, very carefully to know that I'm making the right decision to actually turn something off, or in a lot of cases, to watch them carefully and realize I don't have to turn them
Mm.
off. Right. So that kind of hyper local is the word you used for it, right? That neighborhood level kind of understanding of the conditions is really critical to be able to make key operational decisions around.
So, as fire behavior becomes more extreme due to climate change, what is the next major technological leap you guys are working on to enhance predictive accuracy and those decision-making capabilities?
Yeah, this is fun. I mean, I get to work with a lot of people who work incredibly hard every day to figure out how can we be doing this better? What's next? How can we help the folks who are making these critical decisions and, helping our safety? So a few areas that we're looking at. One of them is longer prediction windows. Kind of on our roadmap here right now, we're out to 5+ days. We think we can extend that to, 15 and using sort of updated techniques and so forth without a loss of validation or fidelity and accuracy of the modeling. And so that's really important, right? So to give people a longer time window to be able to understand and be able to make preparations to watch the changing conditions. Forewarned is forearmed, right? So you can do huge changes in staffing and logistics and infrastructure preparation and so forth, and things that could avoid fires with, and potentially ones that affect our communities less, right? So that's a big one. One of the recent things that we've done here was we've extended wildfire into other forms of extreme weather. And so I think one of the things that we're unfortunately experiencing more of is more extreme weather events. So we've had more billion-dollar catastrophic loss events effectively in the last few years than we ever had before. Just ask the insurance companies, right? Wildfire, isn't the only thing we're worried about, and they're all connected. So not only, I live, here on the East Coast, and for example, we're worried about hurricanes, we're worried about flooding in other parts of the country. It's extreme wind events that have other natural issues that aren't related to fire. And so, being able to look at those things all at once and all together as an emergency manager, as a utility, as a fire agency is pretty important, right? So we want to be able to support people there. And they are connected. The hurricane in North Carolina, Helene, a little while back, left a tremendous amount of dead fuel, right? So the flooding that came from that, all the trees were washed away, a terrible incident on its own, but even worse, it left all of those trees effectively to dry out over the next 18, 24 months. And those actually led to some of the biggest fires in North Carolina history following, right? There's just all this extra fuel on the ground. So we're integrating those views together here to be able to give people that forward view on the different kinds of events as well as the interplay between them. The other place that's pretty interesting, there are a lot of great technologies coming online right now for real-time sensors and satellite and so forth that are sort of tell you what's happening as it's happening, right? So we're integrating a lot of those kinds of feeds effectively into our system. Now you can be able to tell, what's going to happen, what's happening, and as you have a better read on exactly what's happening in the moment, then you can make more sort of like iterative predictive insights as to what's happening next even during an incident. Right now, one of the most difficult things with fires is between the time it's actually reported and the time you were able to add, bring suppression to it. Like if we can compress that time, you can reduce the size of the fires. So we work with Cal Fire, and one of the things I find really amazing about them is they're trying to make, 90, 95% of their ignitions suppressed under 10 acres. I don't know if anybody's, put metrics on it like that, but they're achieving that. That's an incredible thing by an incredible organization. And so anything we can do to help kind of compress that window can keep things under 10 acres and keep it small effectively. We can't stop all ignitions, right, on the wildfire side. We can, however, I think we do have a shot at stopping catastrophic fires.
Wow, absolutely incredible. All right, Indy, before I let you go, it's time for your off the cuff question. So, if you could have one meal right now, doesn't matter if it's on the other side of the world, you need a passport to get there, what would you have?
So my family is from Sri Lanka, and my kids recently have gotten into, through visits with family and so forth, gotten into Sri Lankan hoppers, which is a kind of, think of it as like a crepe, but
Okay.
rice flour based and so forth, and it's kind of made in a special pot. Or I think our whole family has developed a hankering for those.
I love it.
I'd love to be able to take my kids there
Yes.
feed them the authentic real thing sometime soon.
Well, Indy, this was a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well, folks, that's all I've got for this week's Fish Fry. If you'd like more information about Technosylva, check out this week's Fish Frying page on eejournal.com or our YouTube episode as well. Hey, have you checked out EE Journal on social media yet? Well, you should. You can find us at facebook.com/EEJournal. If LinkedIn is your thing, you can follow us on LinkedIn and you can follow me as well. And we are also on Blue Sky Social and Mastodon as well. And we have that YouTube channel I just mentioned, youtube.com/EEJournal. Folks, it is chock full of all kinds of techie videos, including our very popular Chalk Talk webcast series, hosted by me. And of course, you can subscribe to our EE Journal YouTube channel as well. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you know of any cool new technology or heck you just want to chat, shoot me a line at Amelia, that's Amelia, at eejournal.com, or post a comment on our forums on EE Journal. For the week of August 14th, 2026, I'm Amelia Dalton, and you've been fried.